Welcome back to FANSPLAINED, a medium criticism podcast with Ryan and M. I'm Ryan.
And I'm M.
We're continuing our deep dive analysis into the Marvel Cinematic Universe with a watch or rewatches of each component of the MCU and the extended multiverse. In this episode, we're looking at Agent Carter, a Marvel one-shot, as well as Season 1 of Marvel's Agent Carter. The Agent Carter one-shot was released on home media in September 2013 with an earlier screening over the summer at San Diego Comic-Con, leading to the development and greenlighting of the whole series. The first season of Marvel's Agent Carter aired from January to February 2015 between the Season 2 finale and the Season 3 premiere of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. While the one-shot follows the release of Iron Man 3 and Season 1 was aired during the development of Captain America Civil War, both are set during 1946, making Agent Carter our second entry into the chronological order of the MCU. Agent Carter, a Marvel one-shot, and Marvel's Agent Carter were produced by Marvel Studios and a team-up of ABC Studios and Marvel Television, respectively. Both currently have contested canon placement once Marvel Television was absorbed into Marvel Studios, though the one-shot less so than the series. Much like Marvel's other pre-Disney Plus television, so we're including Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Runaways, Inhumans, Cloak and Dagger, and most of the Netflix series, since that's still very up in the air.
Yeah, except this show didn't have any of the Netflix money.
No, absolutely did not. It had ABC money.
And yet, despite that, managed to look pretty decent, actually.
Yeah, it did. It's very impressive. There were critics that actually noted that it was very ambitious to be doing what Agent Carter did on an ABC weekly budget.
Because it's been years since I've actually watched Agent Carter. I remember the first time I did, I binged it all like in one go. And going back to it, I forgot how good it actually looked for being... Basically, they didn't have Netflix money, they didn't have the Disney Plus money that the shows now seem to have. And, you can definitely tell, because they all look more like... They look closely like the movies versus a lot of these other shows that came out prior to that. Because, we all know what Inhumans look like. But
we all know what Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. tended to look like.
But Agent Carter actually looked very good for what it was.
And while we say that they are contested canon placement, we have come to a consensus that the one shot is closer to still being quote unquote canon than the series is. They both have a lot of weird retcon moments that kind of overshadow what the movies tell us. The one-shot is not at all consistent with the series, despite the showrunners telling us now that the show is supposed to fit in between some time-lapse and the one-shot that isn't there because there's no time-lapse.
And not only that, but it also, we get a lot of repeated story beats from the movies, actually, that are in Agent Carter, which we will get to, but it's honestly trying to... When we were going through watching it, I think one of the biggest complaints we had were just trying to figure out how it fit into everything else. Especially because of what came before it and what we know came after it. It's like, okay, this doesn't fit like it was supposed to anymore.
I feel like you can definitely tell that the one shot was not made with the television show in mind at all.
I think
they were very much intending the one shot to be a one shot.
Yeah, I don't think they ever thought they would actually get a show, and then they were like, oh, well, we like the show so much, so you know what, here, or we like the one shot so much, so here, have a show, and they're like, oh.
Yeah, it had such positive reception at San Diego Comic-Con, basically, that they greenlit it then, without, the actual pilot process where you have to write the pilot, film the pilot, show the pilot to the network, and then the network decides if they want to order the show or not. ABC was just like, no, go ahead and just make the show.
Yeah,
because they knew.
We like it this much, so we're just going to give you our ABC money and see what you can do.
Yeah. So both iterations of Agent Carter, the one-shot, and Marvel's Agent Carter, which is the full title of just Agent Carter on ABC, give us a Peggy Carter struggling against the sexist confines of the post-war home front. She has to fight to find work of value to her skill set within the relatively adrift SSR, that's the Strategic Science Reserve, that's proto-SHIELD that we saw in Captain America, before the organization is absorbed by SHIELD as we know it in later canon. The one-shot pits Peggy against the Zodiac as she intercepts a phone call after hours in the SSR office and takes on a mission single-handedly. Should note, however, Zodiac is not the same as the Zodiac
Killer.
As in the serial killer, yeah.
No, this is not even remotely in the same ballpark as that, plus those murders happened a lot later.
They just wanted something that sounded equally spooky as Hydra and Leviathan, right? Just wanted to clarify that. So Senior Agent Flynn attempts to punish Peggy for going against protocol, but he is interrupted by Howard Stark, who along with Colonel Phillips offers Peggy a position within the newly emerging S.H.I.E.L.D. The first season of the television show takes a different approach. Reportedly, like I said earlier, the series is meant to fit between parts of the one-shot, but given that there's such a small lapse of time, and that Agent Flynn is not present in the ABC show, or anything else, if I remember correctly.
No.
I might be wrong on that. Feel free to correct me.
Superior's a completely other guy.
Yeah. We tend to treat them as different takes meant to lead us to similar results. Season 1 dives even deeper to into Peggy struggling to find her place as an independent and capable woman in post-war Manhattan, as well as finding a position of worth among her arguably less capable male coworkers within the SSR. Howard Stark comes to Peggy with a problem. One of his vaults of experiments has been broken into, and dangerous technology has been raided to be sold on the black market. Funny enough, it sounds like a movie we're going to get to at the end of the month.
Yeah, it doesn't sound familiar at all. It's totally an original take,
Definitely not reused. With these volatile technologies not meant to see the light of day, Stark is pointed to as suspect number 1. The US government and the SSR see Stark as lying about the theft in order to sell weapons to foreign agents, making him guilty of treason in their eyes. Stark trusts no one but Peggy Carter to find the truth that will clear his name. Peggy uses her often dismissed and invisible presence among her coworkers to conduct her own investigation of the Stark theft, pitting her against Leviathan, which is essentially a Russian version of Hydra.
Yeah.
So when I was doing research on this, or when we were watching it, and I did research on it when they brought Leviathan up, Leviathan and Hydra are essentially the same sea monster from different mythologies.
Yeah.
So Agent Carter actually talks about Leviathan being biblical. But they don't... Sousa mentions it, and then they just kind of gloss over it, and they never really touch on it again.
We don't want to get too religious.
No. But when I looked into it, it's a giant water dragon that eventually came to be used as a term for just sea monsters in general.
Yeah.
There was this weird meta about how Leviathan was a female monster, with Behemoth being the male version of that, which could lead into what Leviathan is doing when you have the Red Room, their female agents, and this placement within a very female-centric show.
Yes.
I don't know if the meta actually goes that deep, but I would like to think it does.
I mean, considering some of the other stuff we found on the writers, I don't know if it went that deep. I think we might actually be making it more deep just by adding that little bit of meta context to it.
Well, I'll make it that deep. It's fine. Because I can't say it. The Hydra. I know there's a much longer name for it, and I even practiced how to say it, and I can't even remember how to do it. But the Hydra, when it's typically depicted in like films and TV and all that Greek mythology stuff, it's usually just a giant dragon that's walking around, and it has 3 heads, and then you chop the heads off, and then it sprouts more heads. The thing is that it does that, but it's actually also a sea monster. It's not a land monster.
Yeah, but we can't have a dragon in our King James Bible, madam.
Well, no. What I'm saying is that Hydra and Leviathan are essentially the same thing, which is coding us into Leviathan being Russian's version of Hydra.
Yeah.
Up until Hydra basically absorbs the remnants of Leviathan into it.
Yeah, because I think we basically just decided that Leviathan is one head of the Hydra.
It is at the end of the show, certainly.
Mm-hmm. We have many.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Agent Carter, a Marvel one-shot, was directed by Louis D'Esposito, who also directed the pilot of the television show, and it was written by Eric Pearson, who served as a writer on one of the episodes in the season. It wasn't the pilot, because the pilot was written by Marcus and McFeely, who were the writers of the first Avenger.
Yeah. Which is probably why they got the tone for that pretty well done in the first episode.
Yeah, they basically made everybody go through boot camp.
Yes.
To make sure that all of their episodes adhered to the pilot.
Yes.
Which is how you get away with that, I guess. Mm-hmm. D'Esposito currently serves as the co-president of Marvel Studios alongside Kevin Feige, who served as a producer on the one-shot. Season 1 of the television series sees a number of different directors and writers both. There's a ton of them. I didn't go into all of them, but most notably is the involvement on the pilot from the big higher-ups involved with canon and writing the consistency of things, which...
I mean, it's pretty rare for TV shows to actually get the same writer on every episode. When you actually do see that nowadays, it's really not a common thing at all.
Yeah, most of Joss Whedon's don't work like that either. He'll write the pilot, he'll concept it, and then the showrunners will be the people consistently writing it back and forth most of the time.
I think one of the few shows that actually did keep a regular writer on episode to episode was the first season of Fargo on FX.
Mm-hmm.
Who, that showrunner later went to do Legion, so...
Well, we'll get to that, won't we?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So, Agent Carter, a Marvel one-shot, also stars Haley Atwell returning as Peggy Carter, Dominic Cooper reprising his role as Howard Stark,
Neil McDonough, also as Dum Dum Dugan, who played a soldier in another show, actually, Band of Brothers. He was Lieutenant Lynn Buck Compton, which I found that pretty funny when I remembered it. But his characterization in both of those is pretty stark. I didn't mean that.
Pun not intended.
No, because Dum Dum is he's lovable, but he is kind of dumb. And
yes.
Buck Compton was a very well-respected soldier in his Band of Brothers.
Yes.
And his whole storyline is actually really sad that we're not going to get into here, actually.
It also heavily features Bradley Whitford as Agent Flynn. This is really the only time you ever see Agent Flynn.
Yeah.
The one-shot also includes a cameo from Shane Black as the voiceover on the phone giving mission directives. Black was the director and co-writer of the then most recent MCU film Iron Man 3.
Which probably explains for the tone change in that compared to the previously 2 Favreau outings.
Yes. Yes.
He was also I think he, I don't know, was...
We'll get into it when we get into Iron Man 3.
No, he was involved in the first Predator movie, is what I was trying to remember.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into his history when we get to Iron Man 3.
Yes.
The Marvel's Agent Carter Season 1, again, has Atwell and Cooper in their respective roles, as well as a cameo role for Donahue once again. Season 1 also features James Darcy as Edward Jarvis, Stark's butler, Shea Wigham as Chief Dooley, who is essentially replacing Agent Flynn's role from the one-shot, except that he's higher up than Agent Flynn.
And he's a far more expanded upon character,
yes,
rather than the one-note Flynn who's just there to be a
sexist jerk.
A douchebag, I would say.
Can we say it? Oh, we're 14 minutes in, we can say it.
He earned that, frankly.
I mean, he did. That was basically what he was there to do.
Play a douche canoe, yes.
Yes. Yeah, Dooley basically takes over Flynn's role, which is why I feel like the show and the one-shot are not consistent with each other, because the SSR does not really work internally the same way from one-shot to show.
No.
Because the one-shot implies basically that Colonel Phillips is still in charge of the SSR, and then you just have Flynn, who is just a senior agent, not the guy who is actively in charge.
I feel like every time they do flashbacks to early S.H.I.E.L.D. or to the SSR, I feel like they're still trying... Every time it feels like they're trying to feel out what it's supposed to be and what the tone is.
Well, and the problem with this is that they didn't want to go into actual S.H.I.E.L.D. founding because they were afraid that Agent Carter would then compete too much with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Not that it would. They wouldn't at all be similar shows, but maybe they were planning on putting a flashback in there and never got around to it. I don't know. So the TV show also stars Enver Jokai as Agent Daniel Sousa and Chad Michael Murray as Agent Jack Thompson, and I did not expect to like Chad Michael Murray in this at all.
Especially when he plays an actual Chad, really.
He is. He lives up to his real life name in this role.
He's a bit of a Chad, but by the end of it, you actually do end up liking him, which I think is the benefit of serial characterization, really.
They're able to give people actual characters. They're not just
an actual
stand-ins for...
Actual arcs, too.
Yeah, they're not just stand-ins for... Everyone around Peggy is sexist and awful. The end.
The end. That's kind of what the one shot amounts to. That, and she kicks everyone's asses while wearing heels.
Yes. Let's see. So we also see regular appearances from Lindsay Fonseca as Angie, Ralph Brown as Dr. Ivchenko, or Johann Fenhoff, depending on what part of the show you're in. Bridget Regan as Dottie Underwood, and that's in quotation marks because we've never actually been given a real name for Dottie. Nice. It's as close to a name as we're given for her. Yeah. A cameo from Stan Lee, and a surprise appearance from Toby Jones reprising his role of Zola among a bunch of other actors here and there, because it's a very full show. They actually filled out all their extras in the show versus the one shot. Obviously, you have 5 days to film that and a much smaller budget because it's not on TV.
And it was 20 minutes long or something?
It's 15.
Oh, 15
it's about 15.
15 minutes long versus an 8 episode.
8 episodes at 45 minutes, so 6-7 hours-ish.
Yeah, you get to fill out a bunch of roles, and actually I was surprised at the amount of, granted, none of them are really main characters, but I was surprised at the amount of Asian actors that they had in side roles and extra roles, actually.
Yeah, it's the one sort of minority that they really, I won't say leaned into because it's not really egregious, it's just more noticeable than anything else.
And not only that, but it's not really done in a heavy-handed way. It's not here it is.
It's done much like Captain America was with the Howling Commandos, where they just are diverse.
Yeah, they're just there. And I appreciate that when a show or a movie manages to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get more into that when we get into the history of things as well. So I'll touch back on that later. Put a pin in it.
What an interesting history it is.
Put a pin in that. So both iterations of Agent Carter stand relatively alone, aside from acting as a general sequel to Captain America: The First Avenger. While there are many canon nods, especially in the series, to later plot points within the MCU, none of them, aside from Captain America, are really necessary to understand the larger context of Agent Carter. No. So, having watched Iron Man, you might understand a little bit more about Howard Stark, or be more confused about Howard Stark, depending. But it's not, you don't have to have watched Iron Man to understand what's going on with Howard Stark. He's just a character.
Yeah, I feel like
introduced to us with Captain America.
Captain America is really the only thing you need to know going into Agent Carter. Aside from that, it feels almost separate from a lot of the MCU, with the exception of Edwin Jarvis and Howard Stark and all them making appearances later down the line.
Yeah, it's like little nods that you can be enhanced by knowing, oh, hey, that connects to this thing.
Yeah.
But you don't have to know it, unlike later MCU entries where you really do need to understand the context of the 10 films that happened prior, or you're not really going to understand why
or like you can
these characters...
Or like you can look at Dottie Underwood in the early days of the Red Room and see, oh, this is what Natasha probably would have turned out to be if she hadn't, not been...
Had a conscience?
Yeah. and taken Clint's offer. This is basically what would have happened.
Yeah. The series is also one of the few to avoid using after-credit sequences. We didn't find them on any episode when we were going through it. So if they are there, that's Disney Plus's fault. They weren't there when we went through them.
She also doesn't... I am still kind of salty over the fact that Agent Carter does not get an opening theme or anything. She gets a single sting, a musical sting, and that's it. And
I was going to bring this up later, but I'll bring it up now since you brought it up. The soundtrack for both the one-shot and the series is done by Christopher Lennertz, and he does like a whole soundtrack for the show. Like, you could even buy it as an album. But yeah, it is very odd that she doesn't actually get a theme song.
Yeah.
She gets like a little musical overture thing that lasts for 3 seconds maximum, so they can show you the logo.
And I mean, you got a bunch of oldies songs that play here and there. But she does not have like an opening theme or anything like that.
Yeah, and it's not like when you're watching Iron Man and you hit AC/DC and you know it immediately, right?
Or that truly iconic opening for Daredevil, that with the red like painting over everything, and you hear that music and you know immediately, oh, it's Daredevil. Yes.
Yeah, for some reason they just didn't think to give her a theme song. Who knows why? So additionally, both iterations of Agent Carter feature the same cinematographer, Gabriel Beristain, and Beristain is a Mexican cinematographer who has collaborated with some big names like David Ayer and Del Toro, and he's no stranger to comic book films either. So past work has included Blade 2 with Del Toro. I had no idea that Del Toro made this until I was looking it up. Yeah. I've seen Blade 2, but I had no idea that it was a Del Toro movie.
Yes, it was very much a Del Toro movie.
He also did Blade Trinity, the first Suicide Squad, not the James Gunn Suicide Squad.
Oh, no.
He's also worked on Item 47, which is another one-shot that we'll get to with the Avengers episode, because it comes right after Avengers.
Yes.
As well as he was the cinematographer on Black Widow.
That makes a lot of sense, because that was a very well-shot film.
Well, and he introduces the Red Room, and then gets to do Black Widow.
That's a nice callback, actually. We come full circle.
Yes. He's also got additional photography credits, so he wasn't the main cinematographer, he just helped.
Yeah.
On several other MCU entries, such as the Iron Man trilogy, the Avengers, Thor: The Dark World, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Thor: Ragnarok.
The superior Thor sequel.
The superior Thor sequel.
Yes.
While production continues to claim that they don't want their period pieces within the MCU to feel like period pieces, remember they said this about Captain America, they also said it about Agent Carter.
It's in the 40s. Shut up. It's period already. I'm so sick of that.
Yeah, despite this, the noir film aesthetic... Film noir. I don't know why I said that backwards. Film noir aesthetic of Agent Carter is one of its greatest strengths.
Yes, it is.
Both iterations use similar filming styles and looks to achieve an attempt at noir-esque, even if many of the tropes within film noir are often subverted as much as they are used to enhance the show's flavor.
Because you have the harsh shadows, which are very noir-esque. You have the way that it's shot in general. Like, you have characters moving in and out of them. You have characters that don't have full focus. You have your femme fatales. You have some kind of sexy stuff, but not entirely, because we're not allowed to go
It's
that
ABC.
hard.
It's ABC. It's a family channel.
Well, I mean, not even with ABC, but back then, when they were doing film noir, they couldn't actually go that hard with a lot of the sex stuff because of the stupid movie code back then.
Yeah. Well, I had actual notes on this with the film noir, the consistent trends or tropes, styles, things that you see in film noir, because there's a lot of contention over whether or not it's a genre or a style or an aesthetic or a storytelling trope of its own or a series of things. Nobody can consistently agree on what film noir actually is.
Spoilers, dear reader, it's all of them.
It's everything.
It's all of them.
So a lot of these similarities that you see in a lot of film noir are going to be like your cynical private eye, like your hard-boiled detective who hates everything, your femme fatales, your flashbacks with voiceover narration, and Agent Carter does try to do this. They try to do this more than they gave her a theme song, but it's not consistent from episode to episode.
Not even remotely consistent at all. They literally have it's in every other episode. It's like some of them are previously on Agent Carter, and then in the next episode it's like, my name is Peggy Carter, and during the war, I did this and this, and after the war, I'm stuck behind a desk with all these stupid men.
Yeah, she goes on this whole, like, very young adult diatribe, first person kind of thing.
Yeah, it's told in first person, it's so weird.
That made it feel so much more like a teen girl show than anything, which...
And Peggy is not that.
Which is the funniest thing when, like... That's a noir trope, but they don't use it in a way that makes it feel like a noir trope at all.
They don't
Probably to its detriment, actually, because it's very odd.
Sunset Boulevard, it is not.
No.
It is not. It thought it was doing something with that, and it really wasn't.
If they'd actually kept something like that in the show... Fine.
Yeah, if they
I might have understood it, but they only kept it at the beginning of the show, but then they couldn't even decide if they wanted that on every episode or not.
Which
either do it or don't, commit or don't.
Which is part of what made it so funny when we kept going from episode to episode to see which one they were going to do this time.
Right, yeah. We'd skip through the beginning, but only after we realized which one they were going to do.
This was an actual pattern going on here.
Yes.
And it's a dumb fucking pattern.
Yes.
Honestly.
Yes, it was. So you also have a lot of gangsters, dramatic shadows and lighting, a fatalistic mood, and extreme psychologies.
Yes.
So Agent Carter has some of these things, but it also really subverts a lot of these things.
Yes, which I was very pleased with, actually.
So you don't really have a lot of cynical private eyes. You have detectives... And some of them appear cynical, but then the show actually dives into what makes them upset, what makes them depressed. Thompson's PTSD.
Yeah, which was another thing I liked, is that it actually really tried to touch on PTSD.
Yeah, Sosa's everything after the war with a disability. Like, this is the precursor to the Punisher actually going in hard on all of their Veterans Affairs stuff.
Yes.
Honestly. But... There's also this, I would argue also that Agent Carter is closer to what they call a neon noir, which is a spin on neo-noirs.
Yeah.
And neon noir is like the thing that basically is the precursor right before you get to cyberpunk. So neon noir is basically what Blade Runner is.
The first Blade Runner?
Yes, the first the first Blade Runner that feels a lot more like a noir movie.
Because
we
got multiple ones.
Not Denise Blade Runner. But with neon noir, you have borrowed characteristics of classical noir. So you have the crime, the violence, the complex plots and twisted characters,
incredibly twisted,
the mysteries and the moral ambiguity of it. It also emphasizes the socio-critique of film noir, so it's a lot about like global and existential crises, depression, mass movement from people from like rural settings to cities, which Agent Carter has a ton of. But this is not always a focus on fuck capitalism, at least with Agent Carter, because, like, sometimes she'll, like, bring up the fact that Howard is a capitalist, and she doesn't trust him because he's a capitalist. But then other times, like, the show will bring up Howard being a capitalist, and they don't really rag on it.
Well, I'm so sorry I don't see the world through your capitalist gaze.
Pretty much. So the other part of Neon Noir that Agent Carter does do is the neon signs and brightly lit buildings providing a sense of alienation and entrapment. The way that it subverts this is Agent Carter is not in any way about alienation, aside from that one part where she notices it as a specific tactic to catch her.
Yes.
But the whole show is actually a lot more about hope, where a lot of Noir is very fatalistic. It's very, this is doomed, everything's doomed. It's like right there to nihilistic and nothing matters.
Basically, the whole phrasing, dark and gritty came from Noir. Because it was one of those things that film started doing where it's not just the tone and the air that's fatalistic and cynical. The storyline is, the acting is,
the plot is, everything.
The way the characters interact is very harsh, sometimes sharp. No one really trusts each other, or if they do, they trust each other too soon, and then it gets really messy.
Yes.
Agent Carter, I really liked how basically, by the end, it's all about you not only having hope, but that you have people around you that care about you, let them help you, let them be there for you, which is one of the things that Peggy struggles, because I think she
tries so hard to be that hard-boiled detective that does everything on her own, and she can't.
And I think she's also so used to having to go out to do things on her own. She can't rely on any of the men around her to acknowledge her or support her.
Or take her seriously.
Yeah. And so the whole show, like multiple episodes, we see characters telling her, you don't have to go at this alone, I'm here for you, I can support you, or I can be there for you, or if you need any help, I'm here. That is very, very
not
different.
Noir, yeah.
Yes. You don't see that kind of shit in your classic Noir movies.
No, well, and it's all about, you've got the female friendships, you've got the wartime buddies that all support each other and still continue to support each other after everything that happens. The only part of it that doesn't subvert really is Dottie and Johan.
Yeah.
Right?
They actually come across as very typical Noir characters.
Yes. Dottie actually is your femme fatale, where Peggy straddles this line where she wants to both be the hard-boiled PI and the show, or other people, I should say. Other people try to frame her as a femme fatale.
They project on her a
but
lot.
She is not one at all.
Yeah, a lot of the men in her life do project on her.
Oh, 100%.
And which she later points out, and I'm like, good for you on actually having that in there. Yeah,
and another key part of Neon Noir versus Classic Noir is that they make class, race, gender, patriarchy, and capitalism all key themes. Which I wish that Agent Carter went harder on the capitalism aspect than it does.
Well, I mean, it's the 1940s and they had just pulled themselves out of the Great Depression, so...
It's just that Peggy will almost get there, because she will fling capitalist at Stark like it's an insult, and it should be, but they never quite go hard enough at it. You know what I mean? They could have. They're doing their best to subvert noir while still keeping the retro feel / aesthetic of it.
I think that's probably why she can't go too hard, is because during that time period, capitalism was not seen as an entirely bad thing when it was doing so much good, basically.
I'm just very glad that the show is not very Ayn Rand when it absolutely could have been.
God, I hate Ayn Rand so much. Don't bring her up in this. I will go on for a tangent.
Please don't.
About how much I hate her.
We both do. It's fine. This is why I wish they'd gone harder on it, but they don't. They kind of get there a little bit. I'm just glad it's not as nihilistic as its genre predecessor could have been.
Yeah, I mean, it really could have been, especially with how many people are basically kind of desensitized to violence or traumatized by it. They very much could have had that same fatalistic viewpoint. And the fact that they didn't, I think, is a credit to the writing and really the showrunners in general for letting them have a far more positive and a little semi-bittersweet ending by the end of the first season.
The one thing it does share with Noir, though, and what really surprised me about this show is how dark it gets and how violent it's allowed to get, even if it is relatively bloodless.
It got really violent.
It's almost the opposite of Captain America, where a lot of that was bloodless. They held a lot of it back, even though there were fight scenes. It's a war movie. But I would still argue that Agent Carter is inherently more violent than the first Avenger was.
Yeah, they just got away with it because they showed some blood here and there, but they did not show nearly as much as a lot of these other movies or shows do with the same amount of violence. Like, there was...
Agent Carter is, like, this close to being the Punisher.
It really was. Like, there are guns blazing, Peggy is breaking arms and bones.
They're torturing people in interrogation.
Like,
they're showing amputations.
They're fucking people up left, right, and center. Yeah. This whole show.
Half of the plot is about this battle that I'll get to history-wise, the Battle of Fanal. Which is where Tony Stark's experiment Midnight Oil was originally unleashed, and basically it makes people Hulk out to the point where they just rip each other apart.
And that was... Oh, I totally forgot about that plot point.
That was extremely dark and violent for an ABC show.
I absolutely forgot about that plot point from when I first watched this, and then one of the characters literally just exploding as they jump from a building. I'm like, what?
Yeah, you have suicide bombings as well. Like, not that it was really done in the same way, but
no, this was crazy for an ABC show. Like,
it's exceptionally violent for an ABC show.
It's like, damn.
It's exceptionally violent for a Marvel show.
Yeah,
quite honestly, because there are a few aside from the Netflix shows that really go there.
Daredevil went there.
Daredevil goes there. The Punisher goes there.
But not a lot of other shows aside from that not a lot of Marvel TV shows. But I mean, we are not caught up on all the recent ones, but I'm pretty sure Marvel and Daredevil and the Punisher are pretty much the only ones that truly get as violent as, like, blood splatter and all this stuff everywhere.
Yeah. We already talked about Noir, so I am back to the historical inaccuracies. Well, Agent Carter did its best to try and imitate an aesthetic, and I think it does that very well.
It does it very well.
It feels very much like it's period, it looks like it's period, it sounds like it's period.
Like, you can even look at the backgrounds of some of these wider city shots, and it's actually really kind of beautiful how they managed to make it look like 1940s New York.
Yes. And one of the showrunners actually said that they avoided terms like broad and dame as much as they could because they didn't want it to feel too much like, one of those mob movies.
Yeah.
And they're just like, where's that broad? You talking about the dame?
Yeah, you're a fast-mouthed dame. That's what you are.
Yeah, like, it could have gotten a little a little too much.
So, very, very James Cagney of all of them.
I agree with that point. But then in the same statement, that same showrunner said, you know what didn't exist in 1946? Smartass. I looked up the etymology on that. It didn't exist in 1946. Turns out it was a term that came out around the 1960s. But for instance, I wrote a line that said, "Oh, I think someone's yanking your chain." And I had to look it up. Did that exist in 1946? And it actually did. It's a mining term that exists from a long time ago. That's our research that we do. And to their credit, they did actually do a lot of research on how old radio shows worked and how they got, like, those sound effects. And we see that in the show with, like, punching the hams and stuff so that you get, like, the good punch noises.
Well, I mean, when you look at a lot of behind-the-scenes footage with movies and how they do the special effects, they still do a lot of those same techniques now. Mm-hmm.
But there are balls dropped when it comes to some of the other research. And the biggest plot point was in episode 5, where Chief Dooley specifically mentions that the vice president is calling him at home wanting answers on Howard Stark and keeping him up at all hours. Thing is I looked this up mainly because I just wanted to know, who the vice president was that he was referring to. And this is well before Marvel had started changing so many details. Like, they were still trying to be relatively historically accurate at this point. It hadn't divorced itself from current events as much as, like, current MCU does, right?
Yeah.
Back then, they were still relatively historically accurate, unless it was, like, battles that they were making up to fit in the movies or whatever. Mm-hmm. The problem is that there was no vice president in 1946. In fact, there was no vice president from 1945 to 1949, so whenever they set the show, whether it's 46 or 47, it's incorrect. So what happened is Franklin Roosevelt died in 1945 in office, and Harry S. Truman was elevated to president because he was the vice president at the time. But they didn't install a vice president up until Harry S. Truman ran for re-election in 49.
You're being a real smartass about this, aren't you?
He went for 4 years without a vice president, and the show is sitting here like, well, the vice president's got me on the phone, and I'm like, Dooley, are you sure that that's the vice president? Because there isn't one. Is there somebody calling you that shouldn't be calling you? Like, are you okay? So that's at least one of them. And then they have...
That is not correct.
This is not correct.
That's what
according to the encyclopedia.
Yeah, that's exactly what this section is.
Yes. There is also the Battle of Fanal, which is this big plot point in Agent Carter for Howard Stark, because it shows the release of one of his technologies before they were stolen from him, and he has a lot of regret and, feels awful about it. Because he saw those people rip each other apart, or at least the aftermath of them ripping each other apart.
Yes.
In any case, they keep talking about Fanau, Germany, as if it's a place.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a place. It is a river that leads to a town that was called Fanaufurt, incorporated in 1923. And it was combined from, like, two old, like, smaller German villages, and they combined it and made Fanaufurt in the 1920s. And that's where the Fanau airfield, which Howard does actually mention in the show, actually exists. So that's real. The airfield exists. Fanau, Germany itself does not exist.
Because the Battle of Fanaufurt does not sound as ominous as the Battle of Fanau.
It's true. It's true, but...
That's why they did it. I'm honestly that certain that that's exactly why they did it. They just took the Fanau part and took off the Furt, because it's like...
Well, doubly wrong was when I looked this up on the Marvel Cinematic Wikipedia to try and figure out what they were doing with the Battle of Fanau, and if it was real, if it was based on a real place, if it was based on, like, a real battle that they were just kind of replacing with their own or whatever.
Yeah.
The Marvel Cinematic Wikipedia lists the actual town as Hohenfanau, which is also another city that existed in Brandenburg, Germany, but it's further east than Fanaufurt is. It doesn't have the airfield in it, and it is on a different place at the river, so it is not actually the town that they were basing Fanau on. Fanaufurt was. So not only did the show have it wrong, but the Wikipedia also has it wrong.
You're all wrong, and I'm right.
And
it is the Wikipedia that is wrong.
It is the everything that is wrong. But speaking of Marvel being wrong, my other inconsistency is not historical, per se. It's how S.H.I.E.L.D. is supposed to work, and how the founding of S.H.I.E.L.D. is supposed to work between the several different canon points that were given for it. So we haven't watched The Winter Soldier yet, so that hasn't really come up. But The Winter Soldier implies, through the photographs on the wall, and we'll get to this when we do The Winter Soldier also, that they have photographs on the wall that show the founders of S.H.I.E.L.D., and that is Colonel Phillips, Howard Stark, and Peggy Carter.
Yes.
Peggy Carter, for some reason, is not given a military uniform photo. It's like this very soft, demure, like, Sears portrait studio kind of photo.
It's actually the same picture that Steve has in his compass, actually.
Steve's allowed. Okay?
No, I'm just saying that's probably the picture that they have of her on file.
You'd think that they'd have a military one on file when it's a
That-
military organization.
That is her military photo.
It's a Sears portrait studio photo. Regardless, the Winter Soldier implies that the founding of S.H.I.E.L.D. happened in a very specific way.
Yeah.
They don't give a date for it. I believe canon sources, quote unquote, tend to put it somewhere in the 1950s, but this has literally never been solidified by anything.
No, it's like every time they do these flashbacks about the creation of S.H.I.E.L.D., none of them, it's like I was saying earlier, none of them can really agree or feel like a cohesive
Yeah, they can't decide what they
origin.
want to do with S.H.I.E.L.D. at
Yeah.
all. Other than, well, we want to make sure Hydra's here. Okay, great, fine. Spoilers, Hydra's in S.H.I.E.L.D. You're welcome. But, so the Winter Soldier implies that it happens one way. The one shot also sort of implies Phillips having involvement with it.
Yeah.
The show does not. Though at the end of the first season, I can kind of see how you would get from the end of the first season to S.H.I.E.L.D. eventually. Because you have an ending where you could still introduce Phillips coming back in, having heard about Peggy or whatever. And then they go and found S.H.I.E.L.D. after all that stuff with Howard or whatever. Fine. But this is where the one shot tends to make more sense to me, again, because Flynn is more of a senior agent than the person in charge. Where it's been heavily implied, or outright stated in some cases, I'm not positive, that Phillips was the head of the SSR. But if you have Dooley as the head of the SSR, where does Phillips come into it with the show? I don't know. I legitimately don't know. Also, if Phillips had been Peggy's boss, there wouldn't be a problem to begin with.
Yeah, it's like everything she did during the war is like completely ignored by the people that work alongside her. Which makes no sense because everybody seems to know what happened to everybody during the war, and yet it's just...
They relegate her to Steve's girlfriend.
Yeah, it's right back to square one with her. It's like everything she did during the war. Literally going out into the field with the other soldiers, with a gun, shooting at Hydra. Like, none of that ever happened.
I did appreciate, to be fair on that point, I did appreciate the episode with Thompson witnessing her leadership capabilities with the Howling Commandos.
Yes.
I do really like that.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the better episodes.
But I don't understand how you go from Phillips in charge of the SSR to Peggy in an office job where Phillips isn't in... I don't know why he wouldn't be in charge anymore. That doesn't make any sense.
Because they couldn't afford Tommy Lee
Well,
Jones.
obviously, but you can mention him offhand. That's what the one shot did.
I mean, I think she briefly mentions him when she's like, when I was in the field with Colonel Phillips, when I was over in Europe with, you know, Colonel Phillips. You know, I think that's the only time he's mentioned. I don't even think the others actually mentioned.
When he was supposed to be in charge, and if he's in charge, he's not going to be taking guff from these guys being like, well, Peggy's useless and she ruined this thing. And like, I just don't quite understand how
he would have
how the SSR works and how it technically gets to S.H.I.E.L.D. other than it does eventually, but we didn't want to touch on that because, oh no, we were afraid of competing with the Joss Whedon show.
No, Phillips would have literally just been like, okay, Peggy, you know what, I'm going to let you be in a room with these guys for a minute, and for like 5 minutes, and you can do whatever you want.
Like, yeah, he let her punch a dude.
Yeah, and then told the dude to get up off his ass and stand back in line.
Yeah, like, this is not a guy that was going to turn around and be like, well, whatever. Like, if you're putting her in someone else's office where they're in charge, right, like, okay, I can kind of see where they're going to be like, well, whatever, they said you did this thing, but we didn't see it, so it doesn't matter, it's not there. So, okay, fine, I kind of get that.
Yeah.
Fine. But again, if Phillips is in charge, this is nonsense.
You think.
And Phillips has to be in charge somewhere in order to found S.H.I.E.L.D. This is where I don't understand how S.H.I.E.L.D. is supposed to work.
I mean, this also goes hand in hand with Howard Stark's whole arc, which, again, leads to other things in the later movie's not making any damn sense.
Because it's basically a reiteration of everything we're going to get to with Iron Man.
Yeah.
Except shorter and a little more condensed.
Like, literally almost the same story arc, beat for beat. Howard already went through in Agent Carter Season 1. We see the same fucking arc with Tony in, like, 3 separate movies.
It is unfortunate, especially when this came after all those Iron Man movies had been done and they repeated the same storyline. Yeah. But if you're watching them chronologically, it's even more baffling. Because you get to the point where it's like, why is Tony's story even this way? We've already been through this with his dad.
Yeah, you would think that if Howard really did go through all of this, then Tony would have known about this shit beforehand and wouldn't have made the same mistakes, wouldn't have literally done the same stuff that his dad did, ended up in court before Congress like his dad did. Like,
I mean, we'll get to that when we get to Iron Man, because there are parts of it I can buy, but it's really contingent on the relationship between Howard and Tony, which is only really kind of glossed over.
It's very glossed over with how many times he brings up his dad, with how many times Howard actually does show up in the other movies. We don't actually get a good gist of their relationship at all.
Well, that and older Howard and Dominic Cooper's Howard are basically 2 different characters.
And we don't know how that actually happened.
Mm-hmm. We don't know how old Howard ended up becoming, like, so cynical that we're repeating the same cycle over again. And that's actually very interesting, and it's not one of the things that's ever addressed.
No. It's really...
Well, again, we'll get to that later, because that is a tangent for another day. But there are things that Agent Carter did well, and we talked about the aesthetic, and it feels very period. Other than the couple of snafus that I've pointed out, it's relatively accurate. It sounds like it's from the period. Snafu, which is the name of an episode. So the Griffith Hotel, which is the all-female apartment, basically the dormitory that Peggy ends up staying with Angie a couple episodes into the show, is actually based on a real place in New York. It was called the Barbizon Hotel for Women, and it was named that because they thought it sounded super fancy. But it was like this giant dormitory building, so it was even more of a dormitory than the one that we see in Agent Carter. So the actual Barbizon was literally dorm rooms. You had shared bathrooms. You had shared meal spaces. At least Peggy gets her own bathroom.
Yeah.
And the room is like 3 times bigger than what one of these dorm rooms would have been. Like, the Barbizon rooms. The Barbizon was like 23 levels high, had 700 rooms in it, which means you had enough space for, like, a bed, maybe a desk, and that's it. Like, it is literally a dorm room.
Yeah. The Griffith is far nicer. The women have far more privacy, despite not having as much freedom, technically, due to all the rules. But even the Barbizon apparently had a lot of its shortcomings.
It did. It had a lot of famous tenants, actually, like Lauren Bacall, Liza Minnelli, whose mother apparently would call the front desk looking after her daughter all the time. Thanks, Judy Garland, who we see Dottie imitating with her Dorothy
from Iowa
persona.
Also, Dottie is a nickname for Dorothy.
Yeah, she was going by Dorothy. She introduces herself as Dorothy, and she's like, just call me Dottie.
Yeah, because all of the girls in the Red Room were studying American films. Which
and Wizard of Oz is clearly one that they watched.
Yes. Snow White.
And then you had, like, Grace Kelly, Joan Didion, Sybil Shepherd, and you had Sylvia Plath, who wrote about a hotel in the Bell Jar called the Amazon, is based on the Barbizon.
Yes.
And he's got the Zon there. And
she couldn't use the actual name.
Clearly not.
For obvious reasons.
Clearly not. But, trigger warning. Speed forward, like, 30 seconds if you are uncool with suicide mentions, FYI. Once Sylvia Plath got out of the writer's program that she was in that housed her in the Barbizon, that was when she went home and tried to OD on pills in a crawl space and caused that big search, and everyone tried to find her and found her barely alive after attempting suicide. Mm-hmm. So, I'm not entirely sure that this was a great experience, but then she also had a lot of, like, depression and mental health
there's some other
issues
stuff.
Beyond that.
There's some other stuff she wrote in the bell jar that might cue into why she was something clearly triggered that episode for her. There's plenty of research that can be done about that, but I also found it very interesting that her ending in the novel is her character just going up on the rooftop and throwing all of her clothes off the building.
Yes.
Versus what really happened in real life, and I'm just, okay, Sylvia.
Yeah, she's just throwing her prized wardrobe out into the Manhattan skyline.
Mm-hmm.
The Barbizon also housed people like, oh gosh, what was her name? She was one of the original Charlie's Angels. It was Jacqueline Smith?
I can only remember Farrah Fawcett from that.
Oh. Jacqueline Smith, I was right. It was right there. I hadn't scrolled down far enough. And a bunch of other famous people would like come and go up until the hotel became a real hotel and started allowing men in the 80s. You know, once
in the 80s.
In the 80s, once everybody's, oh no, we must protect the fragile virginity and virtue of our young women trying to have careers in New York City.
At least until they find a husband and are married, and then they can leave.
And then they can go do whatever they want.
Yeah, then they can go off with the men.
Betsy Johnson was also a guest at the Barbizon at one point. But one of the funnier stories, and I think it's mentioned in Captain America when they're arranging that dance at the end. Mm-hmm. So the Stork Club invited Barbizon women to eat and drink for free because of the mystique of the hotel and all of the rumors that it was full of beautiful women, because again, one of the weird strict prerequisites, aside from having like 3 letters of glowing recommendation, was they judged you on your looks. Mm-hmm. To get you into this building.
I mean, I'm not really that surprised by that, actually.
But if I remember correctly, the Stork Club is where Peggy's telling Steve to meet her.
Yeah. She is.
Irony of ironies.
Well, I mean, it was a club, too.
It was.
So by that definition, he could actually go into the club. He just couldn't go into the other floors of the...
Well, the club is not in the hotel. It's separate. They just invited the girls from the hotel because they were so mysterious and they were so interested. Here's a free ladies' night. Please come hang out.
They're so mysterious being shut up in this hotel.
In this Rapunzel tower of the Barbizon.
It is kind of a Rapunzel tower.
A little bit. And the show actually does relatively nail that, although...
Especially with the dude climbing up to see his girlfriend, actually.
Yes.
Peggy just stands there with her gun pointed at him.
I would argue, however, that the Griffith is far more... There's more freedom in it, oddly enough.
Yeah.
But also it's a lot more diverse than the actual Barbizon, which did not have its first black female guest until the 1950s, which is when the Mademoiselle program, which is what Sylvia Plath was also a part of. She was like a guest editor, and that's how she ended up there.
Yeah, she wrote about that in the bell jar, too.
Mm-hmm. It's the same program, and that's how they ended up with their first... The Mademoiselle program took on, like, their first black guest editor, so she ended up in the Barbizon, which was... She happened to be their first black female guest, so it was incredibly waspy and white. They don't know if there were, like, a lot of passing, quote-unquote, minorities.
Shocked, I tell you.
They don't know. Probably not, though, considering how much weird shit you have to go through in order to get residency into that building once upon a time.
Yeah, and the Griffith of the show, it's
a lot more diverse.
Yeah, they make a point of showing you all the different kinds of women and talking about all of them and how just, going through what they do, what family they have, and I actually really liked the one aside where Angie was like, oh, well, she's just a slut.
Yes. As much as I'm not into slut shaming, it was really funny.
It was a really funny line.
You don't expect Angie, who's like super nice and outgoing, whatever, to just super dismiss somebody like that, especially when Howard is going through their entire floor, banging every one of Peggy's neighbors.
Like, she has to go to multiple
to every single one of her neighbors
and be like, where are you now?
Oh my god.
And he just comes out of a different door this time. Like, it's whack-a-mole with him.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But they added the Barbizon in the show because they were afraid, because the whole point of the show being Peggy struggling against, you know, like, the patriarchy, basically. They were afraid that the show had too many men in it. So they added the Barbizon and, like, the side characters and all the stuff with Dottie and Angie to add more women to it. But, like, I really like the dynamic of having proto-Black Widow versus Peggy.
Yeah, I think it was actually a really good decision for them to do, because it's not just adding more women to the cast, but you're also seeing these... It's really a dichotomy of these two worlds that Peggy goes in between. She's in this place, you know, where women are treated like women and have all these expectations of them, and then she goes into the very male-dominated area of being an agent for the SSR and having to work literally around all these men while most of the other women are just pretending to be telephone.
Well, and I appreciate that she's able to keep her femininity while competing with all of these people in her office. They show that in the one shot when she's using her compact mirror to, like, peek around a corner. And it's like she gets to use her makeup compact as a weapon. It's awesome.
Which a guy would never have been able to do.
He wouldn't have thought of it.
No.
So you see a lot of that. Peggy's actually able to keep her femininity, but also with Dottie's obsession with Peggy.
Yes.
Not only do we get the first same-sex kiss in the MCU, this did more for gay rights than any other MCU so far. I said it. You get your first same-sex kiss, and I would probably argue that Dottie is pretty bi. Or at least very bi-coded, because she's obsessed with Peggy to the point of extremely flirtatious. She does not even think twice about making out with her knock her out.
Well, she also wants to be her by the end of it.
Yeah, but it's one of those, do you want to be her? Do you want to be with her? She's obsessed to the point where, like, that line is blurred a little bit.
I think Angie is more wanting to be with her, honestly.
I really like that as well. They also get to go live together in one of Howard Stark's houses.
Yes, they get to go live together, rent-free.
Yeah. Like, I feel like the show is actually very coded.
I mean, it could be.
For bisexuality.
Especially because Peggy not only has the chemistry she does with Angie, and yes, even Dottie, but also she has the chemistry
with Sousa.
With Jarvis.
Oh god, yeah, with Jarvis. Except that I feel bad about that because
he clearly loves
his wife so much.
He clearly loves his wife, but my god,
I love how, but I really do love that we get such a cute platonic thing with them, and that, you know, like, his wife isn't really given any reason to be jealous. We aren't introduced to Anna with her being, like, ridiculously jealous of Peggy. Like, oh my god, why are you spending all this time with my husband?
No.
Like, she could have been.
Which is, I'm really glad they avoided that trope, too.
Yes.
But I'm glad it was platonic, but at the same time, I remember the first time I watched it, and even with this rewatch, I'm like, man, I really ship those two together. They're really good.
They're really cute.
And I didn't expect to do that.
I love them that way, but I also love them as platonic best friends. They're really adorable.
And they're also incredibly British at each other, because even when they're yelling at each other, they still are like, Mr. Jarvis, Miss Carter.
They're very proper.
It's very British.
They're very proper. There are also character nods that we did like. There's the cameo from Anton Vanko's father. And Vanko was the bad guy in Iron Man 2. We'll get to that. But his dad shows up.
Yeah, for an episode.
Yeah, working for Howard, basically. So we're setting Iron Man 2 up, and I did appreciate that nod, because it was the right amount of, like, short to the point, but also, like, haha, you get it, in-jokey, but it wasn't, like, really overbearing.
Yeah, it wasn't heavy-handed the way
he was just kind of there. He served a plot point, and if you know what's going on, you can go, aha, yeah, that guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I really liked that. You have the Red Room, or at least the Proto-Red Room, because they call it, like, the Assassins Program or something. They haven't called it the Black Widow Program, so it's not effectively the Red Room yet, but it becomes the Red Room.
Yeah, but I mean, the SSR is still S.H.I.E.L.D. even when it wasn't called S.H.I.E.L.D. I think it was early Red Room, it just was called something different before they finally decided on to call it
Well, basically the way that it works is that Russia kept the Red Room program even after Leviathan was essentially absorbed into Hydra.
Yeah.
Because Leviathan's kind of in pieces. It was run by Stalin. We all know Stalin does not stick around forever. So Russia tends to keep the Red Room as like this really underground Soviet, like the Red Room ends up becoming like a very Soviet program where it isn't, I mean it is, but it isn't quite that yet because we haven't really hit that as hard as we will later with Black Widow, but that's why they avoid calling Dottie Black Widow.
Yeah.
On purpose. And that's why actually they made Bridget Regan change her hair color, because she naturally has like very vibrant red hair. But they didn't want her confused with Natasha, and they didn't want to give it away too easily.
Yeah.
Because you'd be visually pinging her as a Black Widow. Instead, they give her a lot of like very black and red like tailored suits and dresses so that they can kind of give you that little costume nod without giving you the literal nod.
It's very subtle, but it's done in a way where it's like, if you are in the know of it, you're gonna be like,
and we did appreciate that they kept their braids.
Yes. They did. They did keep the braids.
I mean, to be fair, if you're a girl fighting things, you're gonna want to keep your hair the fuck out of your way
and not have an excuse to do a hair flip. Be a
hero pose. Don't be a poser.
And be a poser about it.
Don't be a poser. And then you have Dr. Faustus, who was a character in the comics. This is actually Johann Fenhoff, who was Dr. Ivchenko until we revealed that he was actually Johann Fenhoff, and that was actually his name, and he was at the Battle of Fanau, and his family died, and then he ended up working for Leviathan because he was captured and coerced into it, basically. But they do this in a way where it wasn't when they introduced him. I figured it out. It was when he was in Dooley's office. They introduce him in episode 7, where Johann is sitting in Dooley's office reading Christopher Marlowe's The Tragic Life of Dr. Faustus. And that's how they get away with calling him Dr. Faustus, but not calling him Dr. Faustus, because they never get around to that.
Yeah.
And then you have surprise Zola showing up at the end with the nods at the Winter Soldier program for Hydra once he gets into power, or enough power that he can start planting the seeds of Hydra in S.H.I.E.L.D. But he ends up in a prison room with Johann, and Johann's got all these mind control things, and Zola's very interested in the mind control, and we're led to believe that this is the beginning of
a beautiful friendship.
Yes, the beginning of the Winter Soldier program as we will come to know it much, much later. But then there were also character nods that were not done so well, and we already talked about this with basically Howard Stark's arc being a literal repeat of what we'll see later in Iron Man, but we'll get to that again later when we do Iron Man, because we'll have plenty to say on the matter.
Because if you were to isolate that arc in just Agent Carter, yeah, it's a pretty good arc for Howard.
Sure.
It's just when you attach it to all this other stuff, you're like...
Put it in larger canon, it does not make a lot of sense.
No.
Okay, so if you were to give an overall rating to the one-shot, knowing that you gave Captain America 4 out of 5, what would you rate the one-shot at?
I'd probably give the one shot
as like a short film
3.5.
Okay,
3.5 or 4, because I really did like getting to see Peggy go off on her own, not just beat some dudes up, but I really like how she basically just showed all of her multiple talents in tracking people down on ice, assessing a situation, keeping her cool, keeping her calm, using her smarts to get what she wanted, but also, yes, kicking a lot of ass.
Mm-hmm.
And I really loved that part. I also really loved how her hair was a lot longer. I thought that was a pretty good look for her. The only thing, though, is that I feel like Flynn was...
Very one-note.
Well, an effective one-note fucking douchebag motherfucker over there.
Calm down.
I don't like him, and I wanted to punch Bradley Whitford. Not the actor, but he's very effective at playing that guy. I felt like she was really the only character that actually had a character, where everybody else was just there. I mean, I liked the little Howard Stark moment at the very end where he's calling Peggy, but I do not...
I do and I don't.
There's like... It feels like it really is just Haley Atwell's one shot, and that's what you go to see, that's what you stay for, and that's pretty much it. I mean, she holds it all on her own, but aside from... It's not like a massive, the best Marvel one shot ever.
Actually, out of all the one-shots, I probably like it the best.
Well, we'll see. I haven't watched all of them yet, so I may come back to it and say that it is better.
So on that note, actually, I would probably rate it at your 3.5, only because I actually don't like the very, very end of the Howard Stark sequence, because you have this entire one-shot, and we spend all of this time on Peggy fighting patriarchy and making Peggy a badass, and then you turn around to Howard Stark and Dum Dum Dugan staring at girls in bikinis, marveling over the invention of the bikini. And I'm like, it really kind of undermines what you spent the rest of the 14 minutes doing.
Yeah.
Like, it's not enough to ruin it for me, but it is kind of enough to leave me with why did we include that?
I mean, on one hand, yeah, it's a very Howard Stark thing to do. And it also kind of calls back to Tony and having, like, the... flight attendants dress around a stripper pole on his fucking plane in the first movie.
God.
Yeah, you forgot about that, didn't you?
It's in the second one, too, I think.
Like, it is very Howard Stark, but at the same time, I can absolutely understand how it feels kind of, it defeats the purpose of...
The one shot.
Yeah, what you were literally just doing, though.
It's not enough to discolor everything for me. It's just enough to make me go, but... why did we include that specific part? It's a little weird for me.
Yeah, it does feel out of place. It feels like it would have been better suited... I don't know. Maybe if Howard had been given his own one shot, that would have been more fitting for that versus just attaching it to Peggy's, which is like...
Yeah, or you could have attached it to, I don't know, the end of Captain America instead of that weird... bad Avengers trailer, right?
That horrible Avengers trailer that is seizure-inducing.
At least it wouldn't have felt so out of tone there, and you would have been like, oh yeah, Howard gets to go on living his life or whatever, and you don't have to attach it to Peggy fighting the patriarchy. Oh, here's the patriarchy at work. They're staring at women in bikinis.
Pretty much.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's very weird when he's, like, offering her this job because she's super capable, despite... being a woman.
Though that does kind of, like...
It's just weird.
Peggy is really the only woman that he seems to respect, for the most part.
It is very odd. It is very, very odd.
All these other women, he likes to flirt with.
It's because she tells him no.
And also because I think he knows that she could easily grind him into powder if she wanted to.
Do you fondue? Okay, so if you were going to rate... season 1 of the series, not knowing anything about season 2, because neither of us have actually watched season 2, so we don't know a whole lot about it. If you're just grading season 1 as its own thing.
5 stars.
5 stars.
Yeah. I really liked it, actually. If I'm looking at it as just its own thing, it's just its own thing that isn't a part of anything else, I would honestly give it 5 stars because it has a lot to it, honestly. Going back and watching it, I forgot how much I liked it. I forgot how much I enjoyed a lot of the humor. I enjoyed a lot of the aesthetic, the visuals, the camera work is very good. You can't you could tell that it doesn't have the Disney or Netflix money, but it doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't look cheap. And I think that is a service to it as well.
Yes.
Especially when you are making something that's set in the 40s and you want it to look nice. You want it to look good. I think a lot of the acting was very good. I think a lot of the writing was a service and a credit to a lot of its characters. I especially like them touching on PTSD. I like them touching on how, you know, a lot of these guys just don't know how to act around Peggy, but then she's really the one who ends up being their emotional support when they need it the most.
Mm-hmm.
I really like how Peggy is given that really hard edge. She's very stubborn. She has flaws. She is not a Mary Sue. She makes mistakes. She, you know, gets a little pig-headed in her own right. But I also like how they still show a feminine side to her. They still allow her to, like, cry and have feelings and care about people. She can be very emotional, but she can also be very caring, very protective. And I really like how we see her work through her grief and finally come to the end where she's like, no, I need to move on. We need to move on because what is done, and we need to go forward. We can't keep living in the past and regretting those mistakes and regretting what we did or didn't do. We have to go forward because the world doesn't stop spinning for that.
Right, and being able to say goodbye to Steve at the end.
Yes, that I think is probably what made it like a 5-star moment for me. I mean, a lot of it was building up to it, but I think that moment at the very end with the song, with the sunset, it looked beautiful. Peggy is there by herself, given this moment for herself, for her own healing, for her own grief. And I think that is such a wonderful character moment for her, but also just as a Marvel character in general, you don't see a lot of them get those kind of moments.
And we'll get into that later because we will be here for an hour.
Especially with the female characters.
Yes.
I think Peggy is honestly given a lot of the best writing in the MCU. And that to me is what make Agent Carter Season 1, at least, a 5-star for me.
I would say it's probably a 4.5 for me. Which is me rating it higher than Captain America.
Yeah.
To be fair. Because it does actually go harder. It gets into a lot of the noir stuff, and a lot of that is pretty consistent, aside from
it's not afraid
the
to be
little
dark, either.
No, and aside from the little things that it kind of flubs on. No vice president.
Never gonna let that go.
No, I will not.
Never
I will not.
Go.
I will not.
All this research into the etymology and all these, you know, colloquialisms, but
not into the presidency.
Yeah. When it's a key part, when it's a key line, you motherfuckers, you fucked it up. You Mick fucked it up.
Mick fucked up.
And I'm never letting it go.
We need a Mick fucked up for Marvel.
We hulked it up.
Nah. We'll come back to that. We'll put a pin in
it. Who wants to forget the Incredible Hulk ever happened? Marvel does.
You MCU ucked it up.
Pepperidge Farm remembers, though.
MC ucked it up.
No, you starked it up.
Correct. I approve. All right, so thank you for listening to this episode of Fansplained. We are releasing our deep dive episodes weekly, and while we plan on addressing a variety of fandoms and franchises, we'll be still catching up on an extended rewatch of the MCU and its multiverse. Next weekend, we'll be addressing the second and abruptly canceled season of Agent Carter. You can find our updates here on YouTube as well as on Twitter at Fansplained. If you enjoyed this episode, we would appreciate it if you could Hulk smash that like button. And if you want more of our conversations on the MCU and other fandoms, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell for notifications on new episodes.
Oh, and as an aside, I want to take a moment to say thank you to all of our subscribers for doing the thing. Thank you for listening. You are awesome. And there may not be many of you, but you are very much appreciated.
Yes, we love all of you. Thank you.
Until next time,
so you screwed it up the same way I did!
Salt, Shakers.
Yes.
This has been
Ryan.
and M with the FANSPLAINED podcast. See you next week.